to Sheffield Live. My name is Dr. Sibanda. With me today are special guests Sam and John. And next to me is Chiwa Chiana, our co-host. Today we're going to talk about migration matters. We have a festival taking place in Sheffield in a week's time. And we're here to talk about how that fits into our society. So to kick things off, Sam, some background into what we mean by migration matters and why we need to have to celebrate this.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me on. I think it's hugely important right now in the current climate that the UK is in, as well as Sheffield, that we have something that acknowledges and celebrates the vast cultures and range of communities that we have in Sheffield from across the world. And I think, as many people know, Sheffield has become known as the city of sanctuary. It was the first city of sanctuary in the country, and I think that's an incredibly important title and something that the city ought to be proud of, because this place is a sort of a safety net, really, for so many people who have been displaced or have sort of struggled to find a safe home to call their own. So the fact that Sheffield offers that and has done for so many decades, is incredibly special. And I think something that when I sort of first founded the festival a few years ago, it didn't really feel like we had anything that sort of celebrated that. And also, the festival itself runs parallel to what is known nationally as Refugee Week. Mm-hmm. And so, kind of in a celebration of the fact that there are, so many refugees who contribute so much to society, to UK society, and have, sort of enhanced and enriched our culture, is so important to acknowledge. So, so that's kind of why, we put this festival on. That's why migration matters, because it benefits us all. We get to learn so much from so many of the people who come to this country.
Great. Look, I'm just going to drill into that just a little bit. You forgive me there. Look, as he speaks, something speaks to me about the role that Sheffield played in the Second World War. It did its fair share of bombs being thrown at it. Also contributed a lot of steel into that war. And when you look at that war, it has defined the world we now live in 70 years on, in which I think that war managed to defeat what was a force of evil. And it seems to me as though migration matters simply adds into that spirit where we are one day at a time continuing to contribute positively, not just to Sheffield itself, but to the rest of the world. So Sheffield contributed to ending Hitler's dream, but then now is contributing to making sure that other people have better dreams and a better place to be. And I think that history and that trajectory is something that's important that we ought to realize. And I think it speaks to the celebration of Sheffield as a sanctuary city. Now, having said that, do you think that in terms of the values, Sheffield continues to pursue the same values that it has pursued in the past in terms of its role to humanity?
Yeah, well, I think you touched on a really good point. The fact that there was post World War II, there was a huge effort to bring in refugees. I mean, in fact, Britain was one of the kind of pioneers of that program of ensuring that, especially with the kinder transport and, and Jewish refugees escaping Nazi Germany. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's actually a number of people today who live in Sheffield, who still remember escaping. Yeah. And it's incredibly powerful to hear their testimonies. And what's really sad and tragic is, unfortunately, we haven't continued that great history, because I mean, one of the things that inspired me to get involved in I guess sort of putting on events that talked about asylum and sanctuary was a show that I made about the Kosovan refugee crisis, which was sort of came out about around 1998, 1999. I was only 9 years old, living in Sheffield when a great number of Kosovan refugees came over, and I didn't really understand the conflict, but I remember meeting a lot of these young people and not really knowing what they'd been through, but knowing that something bad had happened to them. And there was great support across the country. Sheffield, Rotherham were among a large number of places who took in the Kosovan refugees and were actually very positive about it. But then fast forward 20 years later, and suddenly there's a conflict affecting the Middle East and Syria, and sort of across a number of countries in the world, and suddenly the narrative changes, and the support, the welcome, the hospitality has vanished, and it's been replaced by a sort of right-wing agenda, which is hell-bent against blaming immigrants and migrants for whatever's going wrong, for the economy, for, sort of society's failings. And I think that's what really concerned me, and I think needs to be addressed, thinking how things have changed from what was a country of welcome and hospitality after World War II.
Yeah.
John, what about you? So how's your involvement with Migration Matters Festival?
So I'm I guess a board member of Migration Matters, and for me, I love what you just touched on there about especially the World War. The World War against Germany wasn't won by England. It was won by the Commonwealth. When so many countries came and fought for that war. My granddad did from Uganda. He came and he fought in that war, and there was, as you said, there was a culture after that of welcome and whatnot. But what has happened to that? It's sort of vanished. It's sort of it's one of the problems we have at the moment, where it's very evident with the elections we just had. Just that just paints a picture of where we are as a nation. And Sheffield.
Could you say that it's cycles of life? We had the World War, which was the highest point in human conflict after. You've had many before. You had the Westphalian Wars and so forth. And then you come to the Second World War, or both World Wars, the Great Wars, which became the apex in that trajectory. And then we learned to be friends. We learned to like each other very much. And then we've been in this beautiful sort of relationship with the rest of the world, the Commonwealth, as you say. And then we've become tired of being friends, and we think maybe there's something wrong with being together. We're pulling out of the EU, which was, if you look at it, partly a product of the world wars themselves. People thought, look, if we don't kind of work together economically and otherwise, we're always going to have reasons to have conflict. So let's try and build multinational or cross-national institutions that will always bring humanity together. The United Nations came out of that as the League of Nations as well. And then we've come to a point where we think that friendship is probably a bad thing. We're going to revert back to individualism, and then maybe we're going to come back here. We're going to get back to the good the years that have gone by.
For me, our individual history doesn't begin when we are born. It begins with our ancestors years before we were born, and it doesn't end when we die. It continues on, and it's a shame we don't learn from that. Like you look at, if you look at the UK, Sheffield, for example, there's so many cultures in this city. There's so many cultures, but there's a history that's been in place from before the World Wars, even before World War I or whatever you're talking about. That is eventually led us to where we are today as a community. England has its own culture at the moment, which that is a culture that includes different religions, different races, different what else is there that's on that sort of, when I say genders, but that's sort of the world.
Languages.
And you
have meals, everything.
Everything. And
Music.
because of that, you start to create a new culture.
So it has its own identity.
Yeah, you start to create a new identity.
Yeah.
Once you start fighting against that, you lose the history that has worked, that is being the creation of that identity.
When you speak of fighting, can I just take you on there? When you speak about fighting an identity, you obviously, for something as beautiful as this to be created, you have to fight against so many odds in order to achieve something as beautiful as this. What is your strategy? How does this resonate with people so that you can actually do it? I can imagine through a lot of conflict. How do you get there?
In terms of putting on the festival.
A festival and getting people to engage with it, because you're bucking the trend. People are saying they don't want any more migration or anything migration-like, but right here in the heart of a city where there's conflict, you're able to do something so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it's, of course we have to acknowledge that, this is a Brexit voting town. This is a town that's voted to leave. And, the first year that we put the festival on, it was the year of the referendum. And...
My God! Wow, that's
I know, and we had the joy of on that Friday having to kind of wake up and realise what Britain that we just entered into, or what place we'd now become, and actually that was the thing, is that speaking to people that day, the positive was that at least we were doing something like this.
Yeah.
At least it was happening. In some ways, the timing was perfect, for us to be doing this, because it gave a little bit of hope to everybody who suddenly...
Some single light of something.
Yeah. But I think in the wake of that, and I thought a lot about that, reflected a lot about after the referendum, and the big thing, and the big thing in the UK right now, and in order to kind of actually go forward, to move forward properly, what that referendum meant was that there's been a certain population, a certain demographic, who feel like they don't have a voice at all. And so people protest voted, people who feel like they've been neglected, and that's nothing to do with immigration or migrants or refugees or asylum seekers. That's to do with the British government. That's to do with an austerity, with the Tory government who are hell-bent on austerity. So, and that's the thing, is that actually a lot of people turned around and said, oh, the old people and working class people are racists, and they've been lambasted. And the problem is, as soon as you do that, you shut them down. You shut down any conversation or discourse. So I think the thing is that we need to reach out, and that's what we're trying to do with the festival. We're trying to kind of reach over that barrier and say, we want you to be a part of this. We know that there are difficulties, and believe me, I've had the festival does receive quite a lot of kind of, shall I say, hate mail or trolls, or people who say, come to my area and you tell me that's not a problem, that kind of thing. And I think these are people who are obviously, they've got their views from somewhere, and the thing is that what you can't do is tell them that, you can't say to someone, you're a liar, you're a racist, whatever. But you have, obviously, those views have been, kind of cultivated through misinformation.
But what you have highlighted as well is the fact that a lot of it comes from austerity. Although quite recently I was talking to somebody who was talking about it and saying, actually, the middle class has been part of the people that have been voting, but also the middle class has been affected by austerity, but I'm not sure what their politics are. You can't really bundle that and say this is a linear perspective. So I'm quite looking forward to looking through the acts and stuff. But can you tell me how you're taking the festival to those areas where you think austerity has hit the most?
I think where we're going is places which have been identified as kind of more deprived areas of the city. The areas, to be honest, it's not necessarily going to somewhere where there might have been a high proportion of Brexit voting, people, but more about people who don't have access to things like the arts. Really the festival is more of an arts-based festival than a festival on activism, campaigning or politics. Like if you want those kind of things, the festival debate are really great at putting things like that on. But we're really kind of much more arts-driven. We want to tell stories. We want to tell, kind of And I think in many ways it's such a powerful thing.
Absolutely, that's very important.
To be able to sort of
definitely.
to put a point across without it being necessarily preachy.
Yeah.
So so what we're doing is we've gone into places like kind of Parson Cross Library, Darnall Library. We're putting on events in those areas where we're inviting local people to be a part of those. We've been running workshops with our partners Ignite Imaginations, who've been incredible about engaging people from across a whole range of ages, cultures, genders, and they've basically been putting together like a few exhibitions that will be put on during the festival on celebration days in those areas. We also have, just referring to the brochure here, these lovely brochures by Mr. Joe Bunce. He's done a fantastic job. And his show, actually, Beam Me Upperthorpe, is it's an immersive sort of children's sort of theatre piece, and it's going to be encouraging and working with young people in Upperthorpe.
Right.
And it's about sort of a celebration in many ways of what that community is all about, but also how migration has impacted that place, but through a story which is sort of, I guess, sort of talking about, talking about, extraterrestrial life, and it's kind of using that as an analogy for, the way we treat people who are considered others or foreigners, So I think, there's all kinds of things from, for small children to adults that will be part of this festival. We want everybody to be a part of, be thinking about migration, from a broad range of ages.
Yeah, I mean, it's the great thing for me for Migration Matters, as you say, is about the arts.
Yeah.
And I think that is a very vital ingredient in the creation of a culture, of a community. And through it, God, we get to really touch just a little bit on how much migration does matter.
Yeah.
How much, how much more flavor we get from different parts of the world. I mean, how many countries are represented in this? By
I think we have from last. Not that we're necessarily counting, but no, I think there's sort of roughly around sort of over 70 countries. 70.
Those are 70 different cultures being represented in 1 week, in over 10 days.
In theatre, music, food. I noticed there was food.
Just imagine the greatness of that.
Yeah.
I mean, and that is not academic. That's art.
Yeah.
And through that, I mean, with Joban's show, in Upperthorpe, people in Upperthorpe hopefully get to get a touch of different cultures that perhaps they've never seen before, and therefore have a better understanding of who is in their community. And once you do that, that's a gateway to liberation, to helping one. I mean, I grew up in Parsons Cross, that's where I grew up, in Parsons Cross, and I remember we were the only black family there. Right. And there was a gang called PXC, notorious. Everybody knows about them, and you had to stay away from them. Nothing would go to them about migration if Migration Matters wasn't there.
Migration Matters Festival.
If Migration Matters Festival wasn't there, nothing would be going to that part of the city.
Right.
Look, it's you're talking about arts and all that, and how that is not anything. I mean, it's all of politics, if you ask me. If you're going to bring people together, you're going to bring 70 different countries, and remember, some countries have more than one culture. Together, you are doing what I think is all of politics. And politics is about all those different people coming together and realizing that they in fact need each other, or that they don't need each other. But hopefully they'll find out that they need each other. So I think that a lot of good politics is happening. Let me just ask here.
I was going to ask you before you ask, but don't you think that this idea of maybe you don't... People have always had a diverse situation. The food we eat, everything we're doing, the music we listen to, that has got so much migration into it. So the art has always been there, but it's seeing it and saying, actually, this is where the art that I love comes from. That's part of my society, and embracing a lot more of that.
Absolutely. I mean, look, it's in order for the world to survive as it is now, the one thing that had to happen is that we had to accept that what's within our borders is insufficient. We had to go somewhere for food, for clothing, and we need the world needs all of itself. There isn't a part of the world that can survive by itself. Humanity has been served, if by anything, by migration. Before we went into industrialization and so forth, we migrated in search of better places and better food and more water and everything. And we will always do that. And a failure to understand that migration is the gateway to life and humanity itself. It's just that. It is a failure to understand what life is. Life is about connecting with the new and even still living with the old. But I was going to ask, President Donald Trump is in London. Anything? Did you plan this to coincide with President Donald Trump? Are we any messages here that we're passing?
I think he coincided his trip, so it could be just before Migration Matters.
Right.
I think he wanted to get his piece in before we did our festival, knowing
we always save the best for last.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, no, I don't really think about Donald Trump when I try not to think about him. I'm an American citizen myself. I've got an American passport. Sadly. I moved. Yeah, I mean, obviously I moved here from Philadelphia when I was 4, and I've always had a sort of slightly troubled relationship with the States. I don't feel America. I certainly don't sound it. But yeah, no, I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I voted for Hillary, and I'm slightly ashamed at the moment to call myself an American, and which is awful, really, to say. I've got half my family there, but no, I mean, it's crazy to have a president who's so opposed to sort of my own personal politics. I just can't believe that. That country that used to stand for so much, used to stand for liberty, a country built on immigration, is made by immigration, and but also the exploitation of cultures as well, and the fact that country is now being run by that man. So for me, the whole point of Migration Matters is in some ways to forget about people like him or to ignore him, because he gets so much attention. He gets so much attention, and I'm
looking forward to the happy space, actually, when we talk about all the acts. But do you have a favorite going into the next segment? Do you have a favorite act that you're looking forward to?
I have a few. I'm looking forward to food. That's the biggest act I'm looking forward to. Food. There's a lot of food at Migration Matters. But in terms of acts, as in, I always love the opening party and the closing party. Yeah. I think they're insane. They are incredible. I'm looking to Wiala. Oh God, I might have forgotten that.
There are quite a lot of acts.
At the closing party.
At the closing, I'm very much looking forward to the music.
So we really want to hear about those acts then.
Yeah. Okay, but let's leave it here for now, and we'll get back to all those acts in the second segment. This is African Voices on Sheffield Live. Our first segment ends here. We'll meet you in the second part, so stay tuned. Thank you.